Good afternoon, and thank you for coming. You're welcome. My name is Yvonne Mokgoro, and I chair the mechanism which constitutes these three experts. My colleague, Dr. Tracie Keesee, and Professor Juan Méndez. You have been provided, I suppose, with a briefing of the media. You have been provided, isn't it?
No, they have not.
Oh, they have not.
Yeah, no, not yet.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thanks for that correction. But I think you've had an earlier briefing which indicated that we'll be visiting Sweden. And as you might know, this mechanism is fairly new, created in July 2021. And the members, the three of us, appointed in December 2021. So Sweden is the first country visit that we are taking or have taken. As you might know, amongst others, our mandate requires us to address systemic racism. And in doing so, we are mandated to do country visits and engage with countries with regard to their laws, their systems generally, their laws, policies, practices, etc., which might be systemically racist against Black people and African people and people of African descent. The mandate of the mechanism is a 3-year one, where specifically we must address racism and race discrimination, inequality against Africans and people of African descent in the context of law enforcement and the criminal justice system. And it is a 3-year mandate where, amongst others, we have to look at the historical connection between colonialism, the transatlantic slave trade, and the systems of the particular country, including systemic racism wherever it exists in the systems. And we report to the Human Rights Council annually and have already submitted our first report in September of this year, which focused particularly on the need to collect, analyze, and openly publish data disaggregated in terms of race, ethnicity, as a method, an important method of dealing with systemic racism. So we have conducted our visit and have met with a number of what we regard as our stakeholders, particularly police authorities, government authorities, civil society leaders, impacted communities, their families. And that is so because the mechanism is mandated to base its findings, particularly on the lived experiences of people who are impacted by race discrimination and racism in the context of the criminal justice system and law enforcement and the criminal justice system as a whole. While the mechanism understands the historical concerns that Sweden has with race as a basis for the operations of the law enforcement and criminal justice as a whole in their operations. The mechanism is concerned that there is no data collection, data analysis, and data publication of in the operations of law enforcement and the criminal justice system generally, with regard to disaggregated, the disaggregated nature of the data. There is no data collection, and where, if there is anywhere, it is not related to disaggregation of the data in terms of race. The experts gathered information on existing legislative and regulatory schemes governing racial discrimination, and a major finding of the mechanism is that Sweden should step up its efforts to fight systemic racism and focus on strategies to restore trust between policed communities and the police. There seems to be, we found, a tension between what the police themselves perceive as trust that exists between communities that they police and themselves. Whereas when we went into racialized communities and engaged with them, what we found was that they have no trust, little trust, if at all, towards the police. They see the police as over-policing them within their communities, targeting them in terms of their race, and in stops and searches particularly, targeting young people, young men, including children, some of the mothers told us. And in that way, they feel oppressed by the police, first of all targeted and oppressed, and the police have a tendency to place the lives of young people in danger in the way they operate and the methods they use in policing. Surveillance, for example, over-policing, as they say, undue deprivation of liberty, and we can talk about the details in that regard. But generally, we have found that it is important for Sweden to step up its efforts to create trust between the police and the communities that they police, in particular, racialized communities. The need for data collection, disaggregated data collection analysis, and publication in order to address systemic racism, which we found present in their systems. I think we can give you an opportunity to ask us further questions about our mission, and we will respond to those directly in the way in the information that you need and in the way you ask your questions. So Professor Juan Méndez and my other colleague, Dr. Tracie, Keesee, will just briefly introduce themselves so that you know where they're coming from and why they are here, part of the mechanism, before I do that. Juan?
Good afternoon. My name is Juan Méndez, and I'm a lawyer from Argentina. but I live in the United States now, and I've been a human rights activist for a long time. Most recently, and particularly with the United Nations, I have been the special advisor to Secretary General Kofi Annan on the prevention of genocide. And between 2010 and 2016, the special rapporteur on torture.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Tracie Keesee. My background is in policing. Of course, my time is in the United States with Colorado, the Denver Police Department, and then on to NYPD as their Deputy Commissioner of Training, Deputy Commissioner of Equity and Inclusion. I'm also the co-founder of the Center for Policing Equity in the United States, where we do evidence-based work with police departments and specifically communities of color.
My name is Yvonne Mokgoro, as I said, and I was a justice of the Constitutional Court of South Africa for a full term of 15 years. Before then, I was a professor of law at several universities in the country, in short. And right now, I do a number of things which are related with adjudication of disputes in a number of institutions in South Africa. Thank you. So I think we can take questions on our visits, and details will come out of that. Because if I give you the details, I'm going to take all the time that you need to ask your questions.
Can I just ask one question first? Will we have the opportunity to have like single introduced after the? Oh.
Yes.
Then I have another question. Okay.
We have been told that requests for interviews have already been made, and I think we have acceded to the request.
Okay. My first question is
excuse me, could you just introduce yourself? And
sorry, my name is Fanny. I come from Aftonbladet, Fanny Westling. So I'm a reporter at Aftonbladet. If I heard you correctly, you said that the police risk putting lives in danger based on how they act. Is that the way you said it?
Yeah, those are some of the complaints that people were leveling against the police.
Could you explain more likely how you mean?
My colleague Tracie, she usually explains it so well because she has a full understanding of the operations of the police, how they should.
Yeah. So during our visits with those most vulnerable communities, there's a practice that is done by police. And what they do is when they go into those most vulnerable communities, and this really does pertain to young Black men or those of African descent, when they go in and question them, they often will take them in the police car and take them into a different neighborhood. And they will release them in that neighborhood far from where they pick them up and leave them there. And then they have to find their way back home. And the reason why this is important is because we have also been told there's a rise in violent gang crime. And if you find yourself in, let's say, a rival area, and you're not from there, then you find yourself often in danger of trying to find your way back home. And so that is what's been communicated to us, that you often put that young man in danger when you put them or drop them off in a rival location, and then they have to bring themselves back home.
And also, like you talk about a lack of data, and that is your main criticism.
No, that's not the main one. That's one of that. Right? Yeah, that's one. So
what kind of data would you like to see?
Well, we'd like to see all kinds of data, right? So that's not the one. But I mean, you want to be able to collect data so you can understand what's happening. And that's true with any type of activity that you're doing in policing. So for example, one of the things that we hear a lot is that there is a high level of trust among the law enforcement with community. And when we probe deeper and we say, well, which community? When you say a broad statement like that, you don't really know who we're talking about. And because you don't disaggregate that by race and by neighborhoods, it's very difficult to know who you're talking about. So that's one way. The other types of data we'd like to see is what is the activity? So what types of activity are you doing? Do you collect that? So for example, if you make a traffic stop, are you collecting that data? And are you disaggregating that by neighborhood, time and location? So there's all kinds of data. And it's our understanding that there is data that's collected, but we really can't see that. And so you have data. There's probably other types of data you could be collecting, but because that is not something that's discussed publicly or shared publicly, we really don't know what we have. And in order to know what more we need, what types of data do we need to know what's already collected. And so the conversation around data as a whole is something that's very sensitive. And so really to start that, we really need to understand what already exists, what types of data sets do we have. If it's not disaggregated, then what's missing? So the missingness of the data. And then the other types of data we need to understand really will be really sort of based on what kinds of questions are we trying to answer. And so there really is a very large discussion that has to happen around just data in general.
Yeah.
So that in itself is just a very large question.
Yeah. And to see, let me just elaborate on that. Part of our mandate is to examine the systems of the countries we visit and find whether there is indirect discrimination, because people complain of the question of equality before the law, but the systems operate in such a way that it discriminates racially indirectly against them. So it is important for us to determine how the system operates and how it impacts on people based on their race. People complain that they are targeted with police operations in that they are stopped and searched based on their race. So it would be useful to know from the police as they operate stops and searches, how many have been exercised against people of different races or ethnic groups. But there is just no such information. So it is difficult, therefore, to try to find racial impact of the operation of the systems in a particular country if they don't provide this disaggregated data, which identifies how and on whom the system as it operates impacts.
You were going to ask something else?
Yeah, I just have one last
That's
question,
okay.
if it's okay. So the way I understood it, you were invited here by the last government, and now there has been a change, right? And this new government, you have a new, their crime justice politics has been described as like a new era, like a new paradigm shift. Have you taken that into consideration during your analysis now?
So what we're going to do is just the report that we have now, and we're working with the groups that we have. So we are hoping to have ongoing conversations. Yeah, so that's pretty much where we are. We've talked to everybody that we've talked to, and it's going to be ongoing. It's not just one stop and hope never to come back. I'm hoping you're going to have us come back. So it's ongoing.
It's fine.
Hi, I'm Charlene Pillay from Agence France Presse. I'm jumping off of her question. When did you decide to come to Sweden? Was it due to the recent elections and the results? Or did you decide Sweden before that? And if so, why? Why Sweden?
Yeah, I think you may.
We have asked maybe 9 or 10 countries for invitations. And that's also an open list. There may be more down the road. Sweden was the first country to respond positively. And, this was maybe in August, so before the election. And we were able to come and to enjoy quite a bit of cooperation from the state. We hope to make some recommendations that will be useful to Sweden as a nation, as well as to the new government. And as my colleagues say, we hope to have an ongoing discussion with the with the Swedish government.
Yes, ma'am.
I come from teaching agency in Sweden. I just have one question. About you talked about the cooperation with the state and the government. Sorry. What was the cooperation with the police like?
They were very cooperative and very honest and very open. Not only about the challenges that they are going through and trying to solve, but I also have to be very honest about the innovation and the new things they're trying. They're trying to do a lot of things, but they were very open about all of those things, and even those things internally that they are dealing with. And so they're very transparent, and things that we asked for, they were very forthcoming with.
And we talked at high levels and at low
Yeah,
levels
we
of the
did.
police. So it was a
Absolutely.
very broad conversation.
Very much so.
And in fact, we told them that the conversation is not closed, as my colleague
Yes,
says, it's still
that's right.
open. And they would mention aspects of their work where they collected information which they didn't have at the time, and undertook to provide us with information to complete our analysis of the recommendations that we will make. Yes.
Yeah, Swedish Public Service Radio. So this is a preliminary report, right, today?
Mhm.
And then are there any specific policy recommendations that you can tell us about now? Mr. Méndez, you were talking about
Yeah.
maybe coming forward with policy recommendations. Are there any such now?
Well, we have in different areas, but we're still working on more, detailed policy recommendations that will be included in the report that we're going to submit to the government and give the government a chance to respond before we go public with it. But in the meantime, we can say that we preliminarily we expressed some concerns. First, we included many positive recommendations and encouraging things to continue on the road where they are right now. But we also included some concerns, particularly the ones that were discussed by my colleagues. And I would add also concerns about solitary confinement used in the remand prisons that, of course, have been a matter of international attention now for decades. And that we associate ourselves with the concerns expressed by the Committee Against Torture and the Council of Europe Committee on the Prevention of Torture, that solitary confinement is still not up to international standards, particularly the Nelson Mandela rules.
Yeah.
Other-
But yeah,
Yeah.
yes.
No,
Just continue.
I finished, but.
No, yeah, so
police, for
I was
example.
going to say, but we didn't just focus on the challenges. It was important to mention the challenges and with a view to making recommendations on how to resolve those challenges. We also, as part of our mandate, look at best practice, as people usually say it, or positive initiatives which a particular country might have in their operations. And we found a few of those which we will highlight in our full report, which will be accessible to the public once it is published.
Also, if I may, when you talked about the need for data, were you given any sort of explanation by the government agencies you met as to why we haven't collected data in the past?
Yes, we were giving a couple of reasons. There seemed to be one that was couched in sort of the historical sensitivity of the misuse and the inability to classify around the terms and issues of race. There is also concerns around how it will be used. And there is also, though, an interesting moment now where everyone recognizes that it needs to be done and how to go about doing it. So we also highlight that the moment is now, that there is agreement that those types of things do need to be measured. So we did focus on that, and we'll talk about in our report how to step forward on that. And I also think that part of the recommendations when we talk about data and the need, as Madam Chair mentioned, how that is tied to discrimination. And interesting so that the Discrimination Act doesn't include the police and needing to have to make those amendments so we can collect that data. So we can talk about how all those things are tied. So the data is tied to a lot of the things that we are going to be recommending. So the underlying pieces of that become very important. So we did, and they did have, of course, a lot of conversations around historically why we didn't do it. And there is just an unease around how to do it and do it correctly, and absolutely taking that in and recognizing it, but also explaining that there's ways to do this. And here in Sweden, you have academics and you also have civil society that have been doing this for a while, and they could also come to the table and assist with that.
And we also have the newly created Human Rights Institution, which is willing to do work because they have among them already appointed staff who have not only the capacity, but also the capability to provide that analysis. So in our recommendations, I can already say now, we will probably recommend that that institution assists with the creation of a system and a practice of data collection, particularly disaggregated in terms of race, because that's what you need if you want to address systemic racism in the laws and policies and practices of any jurisdiction. Any more? I see Keesee is handing out, is it the debriefing? Oh, press release, thank you. Thank you so much.
So thank you very much. If there are no more questions, thank you very much for your interest.
Yeah.
And